There's a story today that I wish everyone would copy and share on their social media. Washington Examiner's Paul Bedard, and I'm going to get into this in just a couple of minutes. Worst economic recovery since the 1930s. And again, your good buddies in mainstream media aren't paying any attention to that. What a shocker. If you're listening to my program today, I thank you very much for your dedication. On the other hand, if you're struggling to hear it, I would hope that you'd get something done about that because I'd like to keep you around as long as possible. We've been recommending, at least for well over a year now, that you would see the people in Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert if you have an issue like that. Dr. Christine Pickup right now is the only locally owned and operated hearing center here in southern Idaho. And she'd like to remind you that your hearing health and the health of your brain are very much related. At Mount Harrison Audiology, she's been studying the research on cognitive health and hearing. The most recent findings prove that when hearing loss is addressed with hearing aids, the effects of cognitive decline are greatly diminished. Hearing is critical for communication, for connection to others, as well as your overall well-being. So you got to keep that in mind, right? You want to make sure it's a holistic approach. Now is the time to improve your hearing. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology for an appointment today. The number is 312-0957. That's 312-0957. It's 9:25. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 60. And we have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on air.
Yes, I was just wondering in the con question why Trump, what is Trump sacrificed? Why doesn't somebody respond? What is Hillary sacrifice?
Yeah, Hillary and Barack Obama both don't have any background as far as military either.
Yeah. Anyway.
Media tended to forget that one, didn't they?
They sure did. Well, Trump could have responded in the same way. What did Hillary sacrifice?
Well, have you, and I'm not trying to, I'll probably end up voting for Donald Trump, and he was not my first choice, but sometimes I don't think he's as quick on his feet as he could be.
I have to agree with you 100%. He has just flapped his mouth too much. And I don't care for him either, but I'm going to have to vote for him. I can't vote for Hillary.
A man after my own heart. Thank you much for the call, sir. Good speaking with you. I was thinking this morning of a conversation I had with Benito in his office when I first came in about 5 o'clock this morning. And I was sharing with him, at the end of the Roman Empire, they had the choices of either going with the emperor who had had too much lead poisoning from the pewter cups, who was insane because of the lead poisoning, or they had the option of going with the emperor who was insane because syphilis had rotted his brain. And you had to make a choice. So it was either the guy who had the STD or the guy who had been drinking out of the pewter cup. Both of them were bats, but you didn't have much of a choice beyond that. And to sit here and say, well, the Green Party or the Libertarian Party, not this year. It's not happening yet. We haven't reached that point. 9:27, you're up next. You're on KLIX.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Well, one thing about the Achilles heel of the liberals, the socialists, and so forth, is they can't trust one another. They have no scruples, so it's like they try to climb the ladder to success. But your comment about the media being totally in the tank, it's so obvious to everybody now. But once a dictator takes over, like Hitler, guess who gets the axe first? The ones that get hung from the lamppost, so to speak, are the very people that brought Hitler and these people into power.
Sure.
And that's history. It happens every time.
What's funny is you're hearing the warnings now coming, at least not from all of them, but from some liberals, like the guy writing in the LA Times, that they're starting to realize, you know what, this might not be good for our future if we continue to side with just the Clintonistas and try to run Donald Trump down.
Well, absolutely, and of course, when you get right down to it, I mean, you're basically supporting a criminal syndicate, no different than the mafia is what they're supporting, because look at all their foundation money and et cetera, et cetera. It just goes on, and the number of people that have been associated with the Clintons that have strangely died over the years. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and everybody knows about 80% or 75% can't trust her, but now the campaign is just not on what Hillary can accomplish, because all she's going to do is finish the job and destroy what's left of this country. So, folks, get on your media out there. If we don't elect Trump, I mean, tell you, if Hillary is elected, this country is totally toast.
Hey, thank you much for the telephone call. Good hearing from you. I I saw a story at The Hill this morning, which is another liberal publication out of Washington, and it says behind the scenes, this is not the first story I've seen along these lines. Behind the scenes, Democrats are very, very nervous about Clinton because they believe that Trump is a weak candidate, that she should have pulled away, and she hasn't. She's not opening up any sort of wide lead. And their concern is the fact that what's the big word? She prevaricates, that she can't give a straight story. And then she tries to cover up because she just can't come out and say, all right, if she had just come out and admitted some of these things early on and said, sure, they were mistakes, and I'll never do them again, she might have done herself a lot of good. But when she comes out on Fox News the other day and says, no, Director Comey said I did nothing wrong, when obviously that's not at all what he said, these are the types of things that have her own party very nervous, and they are realizing just what a flawed candidate she is and how inept she is at human interaction. It's probably why her husband's always out catting around. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Short break, more of your phone calls coming up, and I'll get into the details on this story about the economy being the worst it's been since the Great Depression in just a few minutes. On News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 60 at 9:30. I was mentioning earlier how good it felt to be outside this morning with that temperature in the 50s and the breeze didn't feel like a convection oven. And again, these are just slight signs that we are headed toward winter, still many months away, but there's probably nothing more frustrating than that first cold night going to flip on the furnace and nothing happens. That's why you should have someone check it out now to make sure everything is okay. You got to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. They're located in Burley. The team at Ramsey's is going to make sure it's done right the first time. Problem-free. Cozy winters have found at Ramsey Heating and Electric. They're located at 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. You can call them. Telephone number 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. This is the piece I mentioned from Washington Times. I'll get back to the telephones in just a moment, but I just have to share this. Paul Bedard, the sputtering economic recovery under President Obama, the last to follow a major recession, has fallen way short of the average recovery and ranks at the worst, as the worst since the 1930s Great Depression, according to a new report. Had the recovery under Obama been the average of the 11 since the Depression, according to the report, get this, family incomes would be $17,000 higher. That's per year. Think about that, $17,000 higher. 6 million fewer Americans would be in poverty. And there would be 6 million more jobs in the country. Also, income inequality. Real median household income fell by nearly 8% during Obama's first term, equivalent to the middle class losing 1 month's pay each year. Income for the bottom 20% of households fell by a similar amount. Income has been rising only for the top 20%. You Democrats out there, let me ask you, are you happy with that? Because Mr. Obama was promoting free trade with the Pacific Rim yesterday when the Prime Minister of Singapore was here. And, of course, they used to, in the Democrat Party, be on the lookout for American workers. Now they're the party of Wall Street. And yet you can't get rid of that old label. You still think they're fighting for you when they're fighting for some fat cat at Goldman Sachs. You're up next. You're on the air at 9:36 with Bill Colley on KLIX.
Good morning. Hey, I think that the Russians, the last thing they want to see is Donald Trump in office. They're definitely going to be rooting for Hillary so they can push everybody around as usual. And if those emails were innocent, like she says, they would release them, but they're not. You know, everybody knows, and they're not going to release anything like that, although it would be neat.
Yeah, well, I do believe that there's going to be another email dump or two before the election day rolls around. And likely, they say October surprise, Julian Assange, seems to have it out for Hillary Clinton, which you would think that would be, if he's a open government guy, that he would go for the Democrat, according to the way the Democrats describe themselves. I want to thank the caller for chiming in. 736-0300, 736-0300. I do believe that not only the Russians, but the Chinese and likely several other bad actors out there have those emails, all of them. And then there was a report the other day, and I heard Judge Napolitano mentioning this on television, that it is likely that the National Security Agency has all of those deleted emails. So they're available somewhere, and to say they were all about yoga, come on. She tampered with evidence, folks. Richard Nixon did that and nearly went to prison, and he likely would have if Gerald Ford hadn't pardoned him. Hillary Clinton broke the law, serious laws. These would be impeachable offenses. Got that? But yet, her allies in mainstream media are just going along and saying, hey, we need Hillary. Who cares about $20 trillion in debt and the law being broken? If she gets to be president, we can all go out and marry horses, cows, and pigs, and all of we grubby 40-year-old men can go pee next to your 3-year-old daughters. And that's what life's all about in America to liberals. 59 at 9:38. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Yes, all of you old labor Democrats out there, all of you union guys and gals, this is President Obama yesterday saying, hell or high water, he's going to make sure we get the Trans-Pacific Partnership signed.
We have to do everything we can to make sure that everybody shares in prosperity, that we have strong rules to protect workers, to promote high wages, to make sure that our citizens are getting the education and the training that they need. But the answer cannot be to back away from trade and the global economy. It's here to stay.
In other words, I promise $15 an hour for flipping hamburgers, which means most of you will get laid off. But then I'll make food stamps and send the check to you every week so you can go get free stuff on somebody else's back. And we're going to send your job so it's fair and equitable to all of the other countries around the world. Yeah, and it'll be good for you. 9:39, coming up on 9:40. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. In the 1990s, Terry McAuliffe was running the Democrat National Committee. At the time, we happened to be related by marriage. I've shared that story, I guess, a few times on the air. And he realized that the Democrats could rake in a lot more money if they went down to Wall Street and... Now, they're not giving the money to the Clintonistas or to any of the Democrats because they like them. They're giving it to them because they expect favors. And when all of the big Wall Street boys give you all of that money and they call it the chips, and they say, hey, we need more jobs sent overseas so we can make more profits off the backs of the American people while we impoverish them, then Barack and Hillary fall right into line. You liberals out there who are more concerned about marrying the horses, cows, and pigs better realize the future's at stake here, and if you'd zip up your fly and get back to work, maybe we could straighten this country out. Just in case you thought, of course, that your government, controlled, of course, by a lot of these people who have these ties to special interests, was looking out for you. This is the story I was referencing earlier. Daily Caller has this today. The ATF is illegally hoarding American gun owners' personal details. The government report discovered the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives illegally stockpiles gun owners' personal information. The U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO, the go-to federal oversight agency, conducted an audit of ATF and found it does not remove certain identifiable information despite the law explicitly mandating it to do so. GAO conducted reviews for 4 data systems and concluded at least 2 of ATF systems violated official protocols. Gee, I wonder why they're keeping a list. Well, just in case, if people out there ever have an inkling that they're fed up with this government, we would be able to track down who would be the heavily armed folks, and we could liquidate them. 9:45. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. How about this? Representative Tom Price. He is writing today in Washington Examiner, and that would mean he's a congressman. 2015, federal agencies issued 3,410 rules. The rate is alarming, 30 regulations for every one law enacted. During his tenure, President Obama has used unilateral power to expand the size, scope, and reach of the federal government. Now, Price is a congressman, and he is from Georgia, I believe it is, which is still relatively I guess it's now called purple. It's not blue state or red state because Atlanta is very blue and the rest of the state is very red. But he's from the redder part of the state. He goes on to write, the true magnitude of this bureaucratic nightmare is evident. 2015 Federal Register, a compilation of federal regulations, contained, get this, 80,260 pages of new rules and regulations. That is the third highest page count in the Federal Register's 81-year history. Unfortunately, this kind of regulatory zeal is typical for Obama. 6 of the 7 all-time highest Federal Register total page counts have occurred during his watch. If you think about it for a moment, so many of these things could get you in trouble and probably send you to prison if you violate these regulations. 80,260 pages. Now, that would mean, and we've heard this before, that the average, and I've heard it from lawyers and prosecutors, the average American, once they get out of bed and head off to work, and by the time they come home, likely have violated some of these regulations to the tune of about 100 per day. Which means that if the government wanted to pull you off the street and lock you up, perhaps because you're too noisy, you call too much attention to what the government is doing, the government would have justification to come and say, well, in the course of yesterday, we were observing and you violated these 100 regulations, which, by the way, carry a stiff prison sentence and could send you away now for the next 30 years. Here's your choice. Like Big Brother in 1984. Shut your mouth or go off to prison. Don't you get what Mr. Obama and his ilk are trying to do to you? First of all, they're keeping records on all of those people who are buying firearms, which they're not supposed to do. Records are supposed to eliminate some of the details of you and your life, but they're tracking you in that sense. So they'd like to know where you are. Number 2, they have the means to lock anybody in America away for violating some regulation. And a regulation is the law. It's just not a law passed by your representatives. It's just promulgated by a federal agency. The EPA, the FDA, the USDA, the BLM, whoever, they come along and they say, this is the rule now, and if you violate it, but, it's remember that line, no taxation without representation? Well, how about no laws without representation, which is simply what we're dealing with right now. I'm telling you, folks, all of the conditions are ripe in this country for someone to come along and subjugate us for good. Forever. There's a line in 1984, I believe it closes on this. Imagine a boot stamping on the face of a man forever. That's what we may be looking at. That's why Hillary Clinton coming along and adding another 100,000 pages to this list would be just devastating for us as a people, a free people. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on KLIX.
But I didn't intend to violate those regulations.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Yeah, for some people.
Thank you very, very much for chiming in this morning. But that's what they would tell you. Well, ignorance of the law. It's funny, though. I brought that up. Grant Lobes was on the air with us a few months ago, and he said this is getting to be an interesting legal point because there are now so many laws. That was always the statement you'd get. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. But I didn't see the speed zone sign out there because it was, obscured by some trees. Ignorance of the speed zone sign is no excuse. Whatever they wanted to throw at you. But he even said here a couple of months ago, the other month, he was on the air with us one day recently, and he was saying, yeah, we've got so many of these new laws and regulations on the books. It is going to become eventually a pretty standard defense. You cannot keep track of all of these things. It's like the tax code and all of the things they've stuffed into that to benefit certain people, and again, to create a situation where the rest of us could always be, afoul of the law, just in case they ever wanted to pull it out and use it against us. It's a bit like terroristic threatening. I remember when they added that one, that came along following 9/11, and we were told, this is to deal with people who might make threats, terrorists, so we have to have this law on the books. I think anybody who came along and said, look, I'm going to go blow up those buildings and kill thousands of people. Here's my backpack filled with all my fertilizer. We'd probably arrest them anyway on some other charge. But we felt we had to add this new charge, terroristic threatening. And then we were told, well, it will never be actually used against regular people in America. And then some guy, and I remember a sheriff telling me this back east, he said, what happens is some guy gets into a fight with his girlfriend, then he goes home and he has a six-pack, and he dumps the six-pack down, and he gets angry, even angrier, and he calls up her house and he says, I'm going to get you. And the next thing, he's got a SWAT team knocking down his door, cuffing him and hauling him off, and he's charged with that very crime that you would charge, I don't know, some terrorist trying to hijack a plane with, and off he goes. It's over-criminalization of America. It's 9:51 now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Ron Johnson, U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, writes this today in the Wall Street Journal. He says, in October 2009, I gave a short speech at a Tea Party rally in Wisconsin. Having owned and operated a plastics manufacturing business for 31 years, I was asked to talk about the harmful effect of regulations on business expansion and job creation. And, of course, he's absolutely spot on. Those regulations do slow things down. Try to go open a new office today, and they'll say, well, first of all, do you have the right drainage from your parking lot? I was talking to a fellow who owns a restaurant a few weeks ago. His restaurant has been in place for 21 years. He was just told he had to have a new retention pond out back. So they had to go dig up the parking lot and then expand the parking lot, then build the pond, and then try to build a parking lot around the pond so they can have the retention. And at great cost. That's what he had to do. Even though he already had the existing business there, no one would grandfather it in. So they'll tell, oh, and by the way, your handicap entrance, and that'll cost you another $50,000. Well, yeah, but starting up a business is expensive enough. Well, you can't be discriminating against people. You need that ramp there. Oh, well, okay, guess I'm going to have to do it. I'm telling you right now, all of these laws that have been put on place over the last 50, 60 years in this country, supposedly to end discrimination. You know, the Constitution says you can pretty much do business with whoever you want, wherever you want. It doesn't say, but all of these see, the Constitution says government can't discriminate. Those middle three, the big three, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, say you cannot, the government cannot discriminate. Doesn't say anything about private business. And yet, here we go. You know, when I go to the store and it says no socks, no shirt, no service, well, I feel discriminated against. What if I'm a nudist? I mean, why should I have to follow those rules? And you know what's coming in this country. Some goofball on the American left is going to say that we can't discriminate against nudists any longer. And because, after all, if you think you're a guy and you're a girl, you got to use the other bathroom, et cetera, well, we've got to apply the same standard to nudists. So we're going to have to deal with all of that. But Johnson goes on to say that the worst problem we have in this country is the size of that national debt, which I talked about yesterday. And he says, incredibly, neither candidate from the two major parties is seriously addressing our nation's staggering debt. As former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen has been saying since 2010, quote, the most significant threat to our national security is our debt, unquote. He also went on to say it was an unsustainable path. We cannot simply afford to keep going down this road, and there will be no free lunch once all of it collapses. Caller, you're up next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Pat.
Sure.
I'm not a young guy anymore. I wish I was, but all through my life, I felt statewide and national-wide, our country would be much better off if we paid all of our congressmen and representatives to stay home.
Well,
because they all seem they have to go past something. Even there's nothing needed being done, they have to come up with some new laws. Like, well, we're here, we must pass a law. Well, it gets to be a point of no return. It's the point where there's so many laws, the laws are making each other obsolete or whatever. They're just constantly changing them. And I just think they'd be better off if they just paid them to stay home.
Well, Pat, of course, that's called, they have these things called franking privileges where they're allowed to use your taxpayer money to send mailings back home to tell everybody how all the great things they're doing. If they can say, I passed this law, this law, this law, it makes it sound as if they're at least doing something. And so they feel that's how they'll get reelected. And, of course, they tell you that at your expense.
Well, I'd be more apt to vote for the guy that says, I'm going to Washington, D.C., and I'm not going to pass any laws I'm not going to vote for anything. I'm just going to say no. That guy I'd vote for.
I had a county legislator when I lived in New York, and he was our radio station was in his district, and his nickname was Dr. No because he voted against every law and spending increase that came along. People loved him. His constituents sent him back year after year after year.
I want a no man, not a yes man. That's the kind of guy I want.
Hey, thank you very much for the telephone call, sir. You're next, and you're up on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
I agree with the last caller 100%. I think we need to stop rating our representatives based on the laws that they pass. I think we need to start saying, hey, stand in the way of the laws that they're passing, because we have plenty of laws on the books. Most of them need to go away. And like you're saying, it's impossible now to even abide by the law because you don't know what's law and what's not, and what's just a rumor and what's not. And it's gotten out of hand.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have a reset. This country has reached the tipping point, past the tipping point. We're now falling off the cliff, and I don't want to say it out loud, but there's no hope unless God just does a miracle, because these people are a bunch of crooks.
Well said again. Thank you. I remember the old line that the worst thing that happens in Washington is that time when they're legislating. So when they actually take their 7-week summer recess, you're better off when they're nowhere near the levers of power. So there might be some truth to all of that. And I brought it up yesterday. The other part of this unfortunate burr that we've got growing is the debt. And there's simply no way, if you look at the projections 10 years out, because you can no longer just keep piling up debt and more debt and more debt. Eventually that has to stop. Someone will call our note. And it's not going to be pretty, because if you can no longer spend this money, and then you've got to spend money, when you've got to remember there's debt service. It's like the guy who racks up the credit card bills. After a while, the interest is killing him. So the interest alone will eat up most of the tax revenue that comes in, because we currently spend more than twice what we bring in revenue. Well, then what happens to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security? Or what happens to your military? What happens to your defense? Well, we'll just eliminate fraud and waste. Okay, and then what do you do with the other 99.9%? That is the problem, folks. And many of us, whether we like it or not, are going to be the people who have to sacrifice. As I say, you can either do it voluntarily, or we're going to all end up doing it involuntarily. Hey, got to thank you for joining me today. We need another hour. At least one more. Bill Colley saying, God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Rush Limbaugh, though, will follow news just ahead at 10 o'clock from Fox. And Glenn Beck at 4, and sandwiched in between, of course, Sean Hannity from 1 until 4 this afternoon right here on KLIX.